Amara Bennett had always been defined by her ambition. From a young age, she knew what it meant to fight for what she wanted. Born into a modest family in a small town, her parents had instilled in her the value of hard work and perseverance. While many of her peers dreamed of a comfortable life, Amara had bigger plans. She didn't just want to be successful, she wanted to create something of her own, something that would leave a lasting impact. She had always been a quick learner, and after completing her studies in finance, Amara had taken the financial world by storm. At 32, she was the CEO of her own investment firm, an empire she had built from the ground up. The firm had grown rapidly, and with it, her reputation. People admired her for her sharp mind and her no-nonsense approach to business. She was known for making tough decisions and getting results, and those results spoke for themselves. Yet, despite her career's soaring success, there was a part of her life that remained unfulfilled, her personal life. Amara had never been someone to settle. While her friends and colleagues were busy starting families or building relationships, she was focused on growing her business. She had built her empire without relying on anyone but herself, and the idea of involving someone else in her life, in her heart, seemed almost impossible. There had been relationships in the past, but they were fleeting, never able to withstand the pressures of her demanding career. She had always told herself that she would find love when the time was right, but the years had slipped by, and love had remained an elusive concept. What she had not anticipated, however, was that the next chapter of her life would begin not with a romantic encounter, but with a business deal, a chance meeting that would change everything. It was a crisp fall evening when she first met Alexander Blackwood, the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the country. Amara had attended a charity gala in New York City, a common affair for executives, philanthropists, and high society figures. She wasn't particularly interested in the glitz and glamour of the event, but it was an opportunity to network and maintain relationships with people who could influence her company's future. After all, business was business, and networking was part of the game. Amara stood at the edge of the ballroom, holding a glass of wine, watching the crowd. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy the event, it was just that she had become accustomed to these gatherings and the predictable conversations that accompanied them. As she scanned the room, she noticed him. Alexander Blackwood stood across the room, talking to a group of investors, his tall figure cutting through the crowd effortlessly. His presence was undeniable, his tailored suit fit him perfectly, his dark hair neatly combed, and his sharp blue eyes seemed to pierce through anyone who met his gaze. Amara had heard of him before. Blackwood Technologies was one of the most innovative companies in the tech world, and Alexander Blackwood was the mastermind behind it all. Known for his brilliance in business, his ability to predict market trends, and his uncanny knack for turning struggling companies into gold mines, Alexander was the kind of person Amara admired professionally. But she had also heard rumors about him, rumors of personal struggles, particularly about his inability to have children, a topic that was rarely discussed in public. It wasn't something she thought about often, but in that moment, she couldn't help but wonder. She shook herself out of her thoughts and focused on the task at hand. She was there to network, not to daydream about the people in the room. But as if sensing her gaze, Alexander turned, his eyes meeting hers. There was a moment of recognition, as if he, too, had been sizing her up from afar. His lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile, and then he excused himself from his group, making his way toward her. Amara straightened up, instinctively adjusting her posture. She had dealt with powerful men before, but there was something about Alexander that seemed different. As he approached, the room around them seemed to quiet, the noise of chatter fading into the background. "Amara Bennett, right?" he said, his voice smooth but with an edge of curiosity. He extended his hand, and she shook it firmly, her own gaze not leaving his. "That's me," she replied, a hint of surprise in her tone. "I didn't expect to meet you here tonight, Mr. Blackwood." "Well, I could say the same about you," he said with a smile. "I've heard quite a bit about you and your company. I must say, I'm impressed with what you've managed to achieve at such a young age." Amara felt a flicker of pride at his words, but she quickly masked it with a professional smile. "Thank you. I try my best. There was a brief silence between them, one that felt heavier than it should have been. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts, of two people who understood the unspoken rules of business and success. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. Would you mind if we stepped outside for a moment? I find that the noise inside these events can be a little distracting, he said, his tone casual, though there was something more behind his words that Amara couldn't quite place. She nodded, intrigued. Of course. The two of them stepped out onto the balcony, the cool evening air a welcome relief from the warm, stuffy ballroom. The city lights of New York stretched out before them, casting a soft glow over everything. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the hum of the city below. Tell me something, Alexander said, turning to face her. What is it that you want, Amara? You've built an empire, you've achieved everything most people can only dream of. But what's the next step for you? Amara was taken aback by the question. It wasn't the kind of inquiry she was used to. Most people were content with talking about her company, her financial strategies, her success. But Alexander wasn't asking about that. He was asking about her, the woman behind the business. She thought for a moment before replying. I've always wanted a family, she said quietly. But with everything I've done, with how much time and energy I've put into my career, it's been hard to focus on that. I guess I've just accepted that I may never have the kind of family I've always dreamed of. Alexander's gaze softened, a hint of something deeper flickering in his eyes. I understand, he said after a pause. I've always believed that we can have it all, success, wealth, and love. But sometimes, we're faced with limitations we can't control. The truth is, there's always been something missing for me, too. I've spent so many years focusing on business that I've pushed away what truly matters. Amara was surprised by the vulnerability in his voice, by the openness he was showing her. She had never imagined that someone like him, so composed, so successful, would share something so personal. It made her feel a sudden sense of connection, something she had never expected. Tell me, she asked, her curiosity piqued, what is it that's missing for you? He looked at her, his eyes intense. A family. I want children, Amara. I want to leave behind something that's truly mine, something that will carry on my name and my legacy. But I can't do it on my own. The weight of his words hit her, and for the first time, Amara felt a shift in the air between them. She didn't know where this conversation was leading, but something told her that their lives were about to intertwine in a way neither of them could have anticipated. I've been thinking about something, Alexander continued, his voice lower now. Something that might sound strange. But if you're willing to listen, I think we could help each other. Amara raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. What do you mean? He paused, and for a moment, she could see the hesitation in his eyes. Then, he spoke, his words changing the course of their lives forever. I want you to have my child, Amara. In exchange, I'll give you everything, my fortune, my company, whatever you want. But I need you to do this for me. I need you to give me something that I can't get on my own. Amara's breath caught in her throat, the shock of his words sinking in slowly. It wasn't just a proposition, it was a request that would change everything. It was an offer that seemed impossible, yet part of her couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something far greater than either of them had imagined. The days after their conversation were filled with an overwhelming mixture of emotions for Amara. She hadn't expected to hear such a proposal from Alexander, a man she had only just met. But the words hung in the air, thick and heavy, like an unspoken contract between them. I want you to have my child, Amara. In exchange, I'll give you everything. Those words kept replaying in her mind over and over again. She wasn't sure how to process what he had said, how to understand the depths of such an offer. She had always prided herself on being in control of her own life, her own decisions. Her business had been her sole focus for so long that the idea of complicating her world with something as profound and personal as starting a family had never truly crossed her mind. But now, Here was this man, offering her a deal that was both shocking and strangely compelling. She could hardly believe what he had asked of her, yet there was a part of her that couldn't ignore the ache in her chest, the quiet yearning she had carried for years. The longing for something more than the endless cycle of meetings, investments, and corporate maneuvering. In the days that followed, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that fate had presented her with an opportunity, a chance to achieve the family she had always wanted, a family that could never be realized within the confines of her current life. Yet, the conditions of the offer were not so simple. Alexander was asking for something more than just an agreement. He was asking for her trust, her willingness to be a part of something far beyond business. It was a request for intimacy, for connection, for a shared future that went against everything she had ever believed about herself. Her nights were restless, filled with dreams of what could be, of what her life might look like if she chose to accept his offer. The idea of creating a family was tempting, but there was a gnawing fear inside her. She was a woman who had built her life on logic, on strategy, and on making the right decisions. This, however, felt like an emotional gamble. Was she prepared to give herself to Alexander, not just as a business partner, but as the mother of his child? Was she willing to open her heart to him, knowing the complexities that might arise from such an unconventional arrangement? In the quiet of her apartment, she found herself staring out the window at the sprawling city beneath her. She had everything she thought she wanted, a thriving career, a solid network, financial stability. Yet, in the moments when she was alone, she realized that it wasn't enough. She had created a world that was professional and secure, but it was also lonely. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable, to open up to someone. She had kept her heart guarded, telling herself that she didn't need anyone. But Alexander's words had shattered that facade, revealing a part of her that she had buried deep, a part that longed for connection, for love, for the family she had never been able to form. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she wanted a child of her own. Not just for the sake of the business deal, but because she had always dreamt of nurturing and raising a child. She had grown up in a family where love was abundant, where her parents had sacrificed everything for her. They had given her the foundation she needed to succeed in life, and she wanted to pass that same love and support on to a child of her own. But the reality was that she had never found a partner who shared that vision with her. Until now. Amara didn't want to admit it, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Alexander. There was something magnetic about him. It wasn't just his wealth or status that drew her in, it was the vulnerability she had seen in him that night. He had been honest, open, in a way that most men, especially those at his level of success, rarely were. He had shared his deepest secret with her, the pain he carried from his inability to have children. And in that moment, Amara had realized that, despite his power, he was just as human, just as broken, as anyone else. They were not so different after all. That evening, after days of soul-searching, Amara made her decision. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her choices anymore. She wasn't going to let the constraints of her carefully structured life hold her back from what could be a life-changing experience. There was something in Alexander's eyes, something in his vulnerability, that made her believe in him. She believed in his sincerity, in the deep longing he had for a family. And she knew that, for all his faults, he wasn't offering her a simple transaction. He was offering her a chance to create something that neither of them had been able to create on their own. With that realization, Amara sent a message to Alexander, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed. "I've thought about what you said. I'll do it. I'll help you build the family you want. But this isn't just about a child. It's about trust. It's about us. We have to be clear about what this means, about what we both need. I'm not doing this out of obligation. I'm doing this because I want to create something real." She paused, her breath caught in her chest, before sending the message. The words were out now, and there was no turning back. The reality of the decision was starting to set in, and her heart raced with anticipation. What would he say? Would he accept her terms? Would he understand that this wasn't just about a contract, but about creating a partnership that would transcend everything they had known? Not long after, Alexander's response arrived. His words were brief, but they carried a weight that made her pulse quicken. "Thank you, Amara. You've made a decision that will change everything for both of us. I promise you, we'll do this right. Together." The simplicity of his words was enough to calm her nerves. There was something in the way he said, "together," that made her believe in what they could build. It wasn't just a deal anymore. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Amara and Alexander met frequently to discuss the logistics, the legalities, and the emotional boundaries of their arrangement. They both knew that what they were embarking on was far from conventional. There were no guarantees, no promises of a perfect future. But they were both willing to take the leap, to trust in the possibility of something greater than themselves. As the months passed, Amara began to see Alexander in a new light. He wasn't just the powerful CEO anymore, he was a man with his own vulnerabilities, his own dreams and desires. And with each passing day, she found herself growing closer to him, not just as a business partner, but as someone she could imagine building a life with. But there were still many questions left unanswered, and Amara couldn't help but wonder if she was truly ready for what this arrangement would demand of her. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, and moments of uncertainty. But Amara had made her choice. She was ready to face the unknown with Alexander by her side, to take the leap into a future that was still shrouded in mystery. The only thing she knew for certain was that nothing would ever be the same again. The days after Amara's decision were both thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. As soon as she agreed to Alexander's proposition, everything seemed to shift. She had thought the hardest part would be coming to terms with the idea itself, but now that she had made the choice, the reality of what she had agreed to was setting in with a force that she couldn't ignore. The first meeting after her agreement was planned, but Amara had no idea how it would go. The dynamic had shifted, and though Alexander's reassurance echoed in her mind, it was hard to shake the weight of what they had decided to do. There was a part of her that still hesitated, wondering if she had made the right choice. But as the day drew closer, her curiosity and desire to see where this new path would lead her overcame her doubt. On the day of their meeting, Amara arrived at Alexander's penthouse. The place was as impeccable as ever, exuding an air of wealth and sophistication. She had always been somewhat amazed by his taste, the expensive art pieces, the delicate lighting that cast a warm glow on everything, the breathtaking view of the city skyline. It was the type of place that spoke of success and solitude in the same breath. When she entered, Alexander was already waiting, dressed in a casual, yet elegant manner. He seemed less like the business mogul she had come to know and more like a man whose life had taken an unexpected turn. His eyes met hers immediately, and for a fleeting moment, she saw a soft vulnerability in them. Gone was the imposing figure of the CEO. In his gaze, Amara saw someone who, despite his confidence, was still struggling with the magnitude of their arrangement. "Amara," he greeted, standing as she entered. There was a warmth in his voice, one that she hadn't expected, especially given the nature of their arrangement. "I'm glad you came. I know this isn't easy." "I made my choice," Amara said, trying to sound confident, though she could feel the nerves swirling in her stomach. "I'm here because I want this. Not just for you, but for myself. We're doing this together, right?" "Yes, we are," he replied, his voice steady. He walked over to her and gently placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture that seemed oddly intimate considering everything. "I know you have doubts. I do, too. But we're in this together. That's all I need to keep in mind." They both stood there for a moment, silently absorbing the reality of the situation. There were so many unknowns. So many potential pitfalls. But what struck Amara most was how their connection had shifted. This wasn't just a contract anymore. It wasn't just about making a deal. There was something real between them now, something deeper than they had expected. The idea of a child, their child, had a way of bringing that out. Amara had always been a woman who thrived on control, on knowing what was coming next, on having every detail figured out. But here she was, stepping into something she couldn't control. She had made a decision, but there were still so many questions left unanswered. Could they build something that was truly lasting, something that went beyond the boundaries of their agreement? Could they form a real family, even if it had started in the most unconventional way? Why don't we talk about what comes next? Alexander suggested, guiding her toward the living area where they could sit comfortably. We have a lot to plan, but I think it's important to take things step by step. As they sat down on the plush leather sofa, Alexander's usual professional demeanor seemed to slip away, replaced with a more genuine sense of partnership. It felt as though they were on the edge of something new, something that was more than just business. For a moment, Amara let herself relax, trusting that they could navigate this path together. We need to figure out what comes next, Alexander continued, his gaze shifting between her and the space in front of them. We need to make sure that this arrangement works for both of us. And I want you to know, Amara, that this isn't just about getting a child. It's about building something with you, something we can both be proud of. Amara nodded, her heart racing. And what about us? You've made it clear that we're doing this together, but what happens once we have the child? What does that look like? Alexander exhaled deeply, clearly considering her question. I think we take it one step at a time. We'll be parents together, but I don't expect us to be anything we're not. You don't have to pretend to love me, Amara. You don't have to be anything other than yourself. But I need you to know that, for me, this is about more than just a child. I want to be a family with you. His words caught her off guard. She had known that this arrangement would be unconventional, but hearing him speak so honestly about his feelings was unexpected. It felt like a glimpse of something real, something beyond the transaction. She had expected cold practicality, but instead, she saw a man who had been carrying a heavy burden, just as she had. I want that too, Amara admitted, her voice softening. I've never been able to have the kind of life I wanted. A family. I've put everything into my work, but there's always been this emptiness. I don't know how this will play out, but I do know that I want to give it a chance. With you. Alexander smiled, a look of genuine relief crossing his features. I'm glad to hear you say that. We'll make this work, Amara. Whatever it takes. For the next few hours, they discussed everything, the logistics of the arrangement, the legal details, and the future. But as they spoke, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was unfolding between them. They were no longer just two people in a business deal. They were beginning to build something more, something that wasn't just about creating a child, but about building a life together. As the night wore on, Amara found herself feeling a sense of calm she hadn't anticipated. The uncertainty of their future was still there, but it didn't feel as overwhelming now. There was a plan in place. And more than that, there was trust between them, trust that hadn't been there before. The following weeks were filled with discussions, planning, and a growing sense of partnership. Amara and Alexander's connection deepened, and though their arrangement had started as a business transaction, it was quickly becoming something much more complicated, and much more meaningful. They both found themselves sharing more of their personal lives with each other, their hopes and dreams for the future, their fears, and their vulnerabilities. But even as their connection grew stronger, there were still moments of doubt. Amara had built her life on independence and self-sufficiency, and the idea of surrendering some of that control to another person, even Alexander, was a challenge. She wondered what it would mean for her future, for her identity, and for her work. Could she still be the woman she had worked so hard to become while navigating the complexities of this arrangement? One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Amara found herself sitting alone in her office, staring out the window at the city below. The bright lights of Manhattan stretched out before her, the vastness of the city making her feel small. It was in moments like this that she felt the weight of her choices, the uncertainty of what she had agreed to. But then, she remembered Alexander's words, "We're in this together." And for the first time, Amara allowed herself to believe it. Amara had never thought much about what her future would look like beyond her career. For years, her work had been her everything, the rush of making deals, the challenge of taking risks, and the satisfaction of watching her hard work come to fruition. But since her conversation with Alexander, she began to notice something. There was a shift in her thinking, a tug at her heart that hadn't been there before. It was subtle at first, but it grew stronger as the days passed. Every moment she spent with him, every conversation they had, began to feel like it was building towards something greater than either of them had anticipated. Their arrangement, born out of necessity, was starting to feel like a bond. The meetings they had, the plans they made, and the growing sense of trust between them made her realize that this wasn't just about a child anymore. It wasn't just about fulfilling an unspoken dream for both of them. It was about two people who had come together in an unconventional way, yes, but also about what they could become together, if they chose to. And as Amara found herself spending more time with Alexander, the question of whether they could truly create a life together began to weigh heavily on her mind. They had agreed to take things one step at a time, to see where their connection would lead. There were no promises, no clear answers. But what had begun as a business arrangement had already started to evolve. The lines between what was professional and personal were blurring, and though part of her resisted, part of her felt like she was being drawn into something she wasn't prepared for but maybe, just maybe, needed. The weeks following their decision were filled with planning and careful discussions. They spoke often about the details of the arrangement, about the child, about what life would look like after that, and about how they would navigate their growing relationship. The idea of co-parenting wasn't something Amara had ever envisioned, but she was beginning to see it differently. Alexander was no longer just the man with the money and the company, he was someone who shared a piece of her future, someone who understood the complexity of their situation and was willing to make it work. For the first time in years, she wasn't entirely alone in her life. And while that was both comforting and terrifying, it was also a step towards something bigger. Despite their talks and plans, Amara couldn't shake the sense of unease that lingered in her mind. What did this really mean for her? What did it mean for her independence, her identity as a self-made woman? She had always believed that she could have it all, career, success, and love. But this was different. This wasn't about having it all in the traditional sense. This was a life she never imagined for herself, a life with someone who wasn't just her partner in business, but also in something deeply personal. It was one evening, as Amara sat in her office finishing up a report, that she got a call from Alexander. His voice, as always, was calm and composed, but there was an urgency to it that caught her attention. "Amara," he said, his tone serious. "I need to talk to you about something. Something that's been weighing on me." She put down her pen, her curiosity piqued. "Of course, Alexander. What's going on?" "I've been thinking about our arrangement," he began. "About what happens when we actually have the baby, when our child is born. I want to make sure that we're not just doing this for the sake of a child. I don't want you to feel like you're just a means to an end." Amara's heart sank slightly. Was that how he saw her? Was she just a vessel for his child? She wasn't sure what to make of his words. The tension that had been building inside her seemed to intensify. "Alexander, I need you to understand something," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I'm not doing this just for you. I'm doing it because I want a family, too. I've wanted this for a long time. But I need to be clear about something. I don't want to be used, and I don't want to use you either. This needs to be something real, something we both want. If we're going to do this, we need to make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Amara thought he might not respond. But then she heard him speak again, his voice low, yet firm. "I agree. This has to be something real, Amara. It's not just about the child. It's about us. I want to make sure that we're both on the same page. I've been through so much in my life, and I've come to realize that I can't keep living the way I have. I can't keep hiding parts of myself. If we're doing this together, I need you to know that I'm all in. I'm not asking you to be just a mother to my child. I'm asking you to be a part of my life, truly be a part of it. Amara's breath caught in her chest. His words, though simple, carried a weight she hadn't expected. He wasn't just offering her a child. He was offering her something far more profound. He was offering her himself. I don't know what this will look like, Alexander, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. But I want to be open to it. I want to see where this can go. We've both been through a lot in our lives, and maybe this is our chance to create something meaningful. But it can't just be about the child. We have to be honest with each other, and I need to know that you're in this for more than just a transaction. I am, he said firmly. I'm in this for more than just the child. I'm in this for us. That was the turning point. For the first time, Amara felt like they were moving towards something real, something that wasn't based solely on a business arrangement or a need to fill a void in their lives. This wasn't just about having a baby anymore. It was about creating a family, about being honest with each other, and about taking a chance on love, even if it came in a form they hadn't expected. The following weeks brought new challenges and revelations. They spent more time together, working through the details of their future, and slowly, their connection began to deepen. Amara still had reservations, still had doubts about the uncharted territory they were stepping into. But she couldn't ignore the growing sense of hope, the feeling that, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. She began to understand that their journey wasn't going to be easy, that it wasn't going to follow the path she had always envisioned for herself. But somewhere along the way, she realized that what she had with Alexander, what they were building together, was something worth pursuing. Their arrangement was still unconventional, but with each passing day, it felt less like a business deal and more like a partnership. And as they prepared for the future, Amara couldn't help but wonder if, despite all the challenges, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Amara found herself becoming more immersed in the new reality she had agreed to create with Alexander. The weight of their decision was still ever present, but now it felt more like a slow burn rather than the overwhelming shock it had been in the beginning. They had entered into something profound, something far beyond what either of them had anticipated. And as the future loomed before them, Amara couldn't help but notice how much it had changed her, and Alexander. She had always been a woman of control, her life a carefully constructed series of goals and outcomes. Her company was built on precision and planning. Love and personal connections had always been on the periphery. She had thought she knew what she wanted, but now, with the possibility of motherhood and a shared life with Alexander, everything was starting to feel like uncharted territory. What once felt like a business transaction was now becoming something much deeper, more complicated, and frightening. It was a Tuesday evening when Amara met Alexander at his penthouse. They had agreed to sit down and discuss the next steps, but Amara had noticed a change in him. The calm, collected CEO she had first met seemed to have given way to something else. There was an unease about him that she hadn't seen before, a vulnerability that made her heart ache. It was in the way his shoulders slumped slightly when he entered the room, the slight twitch of his hand when he reached for his glass of water. Amara, he greeted, his voice softer than usual. I'm glad you could make it. She stood up, giving him a small smile as she crossed the room to join him at the table. I wouldn't have missed it. We have a lot to discuss, after all. They both sat down, the silence between them thick with anticipation. The conversation, once focused on logistics, had shifted. It wasn't just about the child anymore. It was about them, what they were building together and how they were going to navigate this uncertain future. I've been thinking, Alexander started, his gaze fixed on the water in his glass. We've talked about everything from the legalities to the practicalities, but I don't think we've really addressed what this will mean for us. For our relationship. You've agreed to help me create a family, but I don't want to make this just about that. I want you to understand that I'm not asking you to be just a mother. I want you to be part of my life, my real life, not just a business arrangement. Amara's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that there were layers to their agreement, but hearing him put it into words made it all feel so much more tangible. Alexander wasn't asking for just a child. He was asking for something more, something she hadn't fully understood until now. I've been so focused on my work and getting things done, that I forgot what it means to let someone else in, Alexander continued, his voice becoming more vulnerable. You've already done so much for me, Amara. I've built a life that has everything, success, wealth, power. But none of that matters if you don't have someone to share it with. I don't want to be alone in this, and I don't want you to feel like this is just a business arrangement. I want to build something real. Amara could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. He was offering her more than she had ever imagined. When they had first discussed this arrangement, it had seemed simple, transactional, even. She would help him have a child, and in return, he would give her financial security and a life she could never have dreamed of. But now, in the quiet of his penthouse, it was clear that their connection was something more. He wasn't just offering her money or a family. He was offering her a partnership, an emotional connection that she had never expected. I didn't realize that I was agreeing to all of this, Amara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I came into this thinking it was just about a child, a family. But now I see that it's more than that. You're asking me to be part of your life, Alexander. To be someone you can count on. Someone who will be with you through everything. He nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for her to say the words. I know this isn't what you expected either. And I don't want to rush anything. But I think that if we're going to make this work, we need to be honest with each other. We need to be clear about what we both want, and what this is really about. Amara stared at him for a moment, her mind swirling with thoughts. Could she really let herself get involved with him on this level? She had spent so long protecting herself, building walls around her heart, keeping her emotions at arm's length. But now, with Alexander's vulnerability laid bare before her, she felt something stir inside her that she hadn't felt in a long time, a desire for connection, for intimacy, for something real. I don't know if I can give you everything you want, she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. But I want to try. I want to see where this goes, Alexander. I want to give us a chance. For the first time in their conversation, a smile appeared on his face, a genuine, relieved smile that seemed to light up the room. It was the first real smile she had seen from him since they had begun this journey together, and it made her heart flutter. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with emotion. Thank you for being willing to try. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their thoughts. It was as though a new understanding had been reached between them, one that transcended the contractual nature of their agreement. Amara had agreed to be part of his life, and in doing so, she realized that she was giving herself to something that had the potential to change her forever. Over the next few weeks, Amara and Alexander spent more time together, not just talking about the practicalities of their arrangement, but about their lives. They shared stories of their childhoods, their hopes, and their fears. They began to understand each other on a level that went beyond business, beyond the child they were planning to bring into the world. Alexander, once guarded and distant, had opened up to her in ways that surprised her. And she, too, found herself sharing parts of her heart that she had long kept hidden. But even as their connection deepened, Amara couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that clung to her. She was falling for him. She could feel it. But could this really work? Could they build a life together, or was this just an emotional whirlwind that would leave them both with broken hearts when the dust settled? Amara knew she had made a choice, and she wasn't backing out now. She was in this, in it for the family, in it for Alexander, in it for herself. The road ahead was unclear, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was walking it with someone by her side. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest gift she could ever ask for. As they spent more time together, Amara couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over her, a peace that had been absent for so long. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what she had imagined. But it was something real. And that, she realized, was enough. The weeks following their conversation were a whirlwind of decisions, emotions, and inevitable change. Amara found herself immersed in a life that had taken a sharp turn into uncharted territory. What had started as a business arrangement was now something far more personal. She had agreed to carry Alexander's child, to give him the family he had longed for, but she knew there was so much more riding on their partnership than either of them had fully anticipated. This wasn't just about a child anymore. It was about trust, commitment, and the slow unfolding of a relationship neither of them had planned but were now finding themselves invested in. Amara had always been a woman who took control of her own destiny. Her success had come from hard work, ambition, and a willingness to sacrifice anything for her goals. But now, as she found herself navigating this unexpected chapter, she felt the fragility of her usual control. The walls she had carefully built around herself for years had started to crumble, and with each passing day, her bond with Alexander deepened in ways she hadn't prepared for. One evening, after another long day of meetings and strategic planning, Amara sat at her kitchen table, staring at the papers scattered in front of her. The financial reports, the business projections, all the things she once found so consuming now felt distant, irrelevant even. It was the first time in a while that her mind wasn't entirely focused on work. She found herself thinking about Alexander more and more, his face appearing in her thoughts like a shadow she couldn't escape. Their time together had become less about the arrangement they had made and more about the connection they were building. It was late, and as the city lights flickered outside her apartment window, Amara's phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Alexander. She hadn't seen him in a few days, as they had both been wrapped up in their respective commitments, and his message caught her off guard. "I've been thinking about us," it read. "I know this isn't easy. I know this wasn't the plan. But I need to see you. Can we talk tonight?" Her heart raced a little as she read the message. There was something different in the tone of his words, something more earnest, more vulnerable than she had expected. She had been busy, yes, but she hadn't realized how much she had missed him until that moment. The idea of seeing him, of talking to him about everything that had been going on in their lives, felt like exactly what she needed. "I'll be there in an hour," she replied, her fingers typing quickly as a wave of excitement and anticipation flooded her chest. When Amara arrived at Alexander's penthouse, the door opened almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for her. He looked different, somehow. His usual impeccable suit had been replaced by a simple shirt and jeans, his sleeves rolled up to expose his forearms. He looked relaxed, but there was an underlying tension in his posture that Amara couldn't ignore. It was as though he was carrying something heavy, something he hadn't shared yet. "Amara," he greeted, stepping aside to let her in. His voice was low, but there was a warmth in it that made her feel both at ease and on edge. "I'm glad you came." "Of course," she said, offering a small smile. She stepped into the apartment, noting the quiet atmosphere. The lights were dim, and the space felt warmer than usual, as though it had been prepared for something more intimate. "Let's sit down," he suggested, leading her to the living room. The coffee table was cleared of all business papers, and the room was only lit by the soft glow of a few lamps. It felt almost as if they were stepping into a private world, one that wasn't filled with contracts or obligations, but something more personal, more real. Once they sat down, Amara noticed the way Alexander looked at her. It was different from the way he usually regarded her, with respect, admiration, and a certain guardedness. Now, his eyes were softer, filled with something she hadn't seen before, a deep sense of vulnerability. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "about everything that's happened. About the decision we made. I don't think we've really talked about what this means for us, for me. I want you to know that I don't take this lightly. I never have. But what you've agreed to, what you've done for me, it's changing everything for me." Amara sat still, listening intently. She had heard him talk about the child, about the family he wanted, but there was something different in his words now. It wasn't just about gratitude anymore, it was something deeper, something more personal. I've spent so much of my life focusing on building a business, on building wealth, on being the person everyone needed me to be, Alexander continued, his gaze never leaving hers. But what I've come to realize is that none of that matters if you don't have someone to share it with. It doesn't matter how much you accomplish or how much you have if you're doing it alone. The raw honesty in his words caught Amara off guard. She had always known Alexander to be a man of few words, a man who was direct and to the point. But now, as he opened up to her in a way he never had before, she realized just how much he had been holding back. This wasn't just about the child. This was about him, the man behind the company, behind the wealth. And in that moment, she saw him not just as the CEO, not just as the powerful figure she had admired, but as a man who, like her, was struggling to make sense of what really mattered in life. "I've been scared," he admitted, looking down for a brief moment. "Scared that I'll never find a way to fill the void in my life. Scared that even if we have a child, it won't be enough to make me whole." Amara's heart softened at his words. She could feel the depth of his pain, the years of isolation that had shaped him. She had never allowed herself to see this side of him before, had never known how much he had suffered in silence. She had always thought of him as the powerful businessman, the man who had everything, but now, she realized, he had always been missing something. Someone. And now, she was here. "I don't have all the answers, Alexander," she said gently, her voice steady. "I don't know if we can fix everything, but I know that I want to try. I want to be a part of this. I want to see where we can go, together. We can't undo the past, but we can shape the future." He looked up at her, his expression softening. "I'm glad you're willing to try. I know this hasn't been easy, and it's not what either of us planned, but it's real. What we're doing is real. And I want to do this right, for you, for the child, for both of us." Amara felt a wave of warmth spread through her chest as he spoke. It was more than just a business arrangement now. It was a partnership. It was real. And for the first time in a long time, Amara allowed herself to imagine a future that was different from the one she had meticulously planned. A future where she wasn't just alone, where she wasn't just working toward success for success's sake. A future where she could have a family, where she could share her life with someone who truly understood her. As the evening wore on, they talked more, discussing their hopes for the future, the kind of family they wanted to build, and what it meant to truly commit to each other. It wasn't an easy conversation. There were still many unknowns, and many questions remained unanswered. But for the first time, Amara felt like she was beginning to see the larger picture. She wasn't just in this for a child. She was in this for a future, for a partnership, for a chance at something real. When she left Alexander's penthouse that night, it was with a sense of clarity she hadn't had before. She still didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing: she was no longer walking through it alone. And that, she realized, was all she really needed to move forward. The weeks that followed their heart-to-heart conversation marked a subtle but significant shift in Amara's life. She found herself drawn to Alexander in a way she hadn't anticipated. What had started as a business arrangement, something practical, had evolved into something more profound. They were no longer just partners working toward a shared goal. They were beginning to build something real, something personal, something fragile and unspoken that lingered between them. Amara had always been careful, deliberate in her decisions. She built her empire on calculated risks, precise timing, and unwavering self-reliance. Yet now, with every interaction, every shared moment with Alexander, she felt herself letting go of that control just a little. She was allowing herself to be vulnerable in ways she hadn't allowed herself before, not even with the closest people in her life. And she wasn't sure whether that was terrifying or liberating. Perhaps it was a little of both. It had been several weeks since they had last met to discuss their plans for the future. Their conversations about the child, their growing connection, and the complexities of their arrangement had brought them closer, but the lingering questions still hung in the air. Amara had agreed to everything, but now, as the days went by, she couldn't help but wonder what it all meant for her. Was she doing this because she genuinely wanted to be with Alexander? Or was it because she was seeking something she had lacked in her life, a sense of belonging, of family? The evening arrived when Amara knew they needed to have a more serious conversation, a conversation that would determine the next steps in their complicated relationship. They had talked about the future of their child, about what it would mean to be co-parents, but they hadn't truly explored what that would look like in terms of their personal lives. What did it mean for their day-to-day relationship? Would they live together? Would they raise the child together? Could they remain in the same space without it feeling like a contract? She had sent Alexander a message earlier in the day, asking him to meet her at his penthouse. They hadn't seen each other in a few days, and there was something in the air, something that told Amara that they needed to address the unspoken tension that was quietly building between them. When she arrived, she was greeted with the usual calmness in his demeanor, but his eyes seemed a little different, not as guarded as usual, but instead filled with a quiet uncertainty. It was clear that he was as uncertain as she was about the future, but he had always been the type of person to hide his emotions beneath a veil of control. "Amara," he greeted with a soft smile, stepping aside to let her in. "I'm glad you're here. We need to talk." "I know," she replied, her voice steady, though she couldn't hide the knot forming in her stomach. "I think it's time." They both settled into the same spot on the couch where they had shared many conversations before. The room was dimly lit, the city lights casting a soft glow through the windows, creating an atmosphere that felt intimate, almost like they were the only two people in the world. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was so much left unsaid between them, so many thoughts swirling, so many emotions that neither had yet fully expressed. Finally, it was Alexander who broke the silence. "I've been thinking," he said, running a hand through his hair. "About us. About what this really means. I know we've talked about the future, but I think we need to be clear about something. What does this relationship mean to you, Amara? I know this isn't what either of us planned, but I can't shake the feeling that it's becoming something more than just business." Amara felt her heart race at his words. The weight of his question settled heavily in the space between them. She had known they would have to address this at some point, but hearing him say it aloud made everything feel real. She had always tried to keep her emotions at arm's length, focused on the practicalities, but now she couldn't ignore the truth. Something had changed. Something between them had shifted, and it was hard to deny. "I've been thinking about that, too," Amara admitted, her voice softer than she intended. "At first, I thought it was all about the baby. It was so clear, the arrangement, the reasons we came together. But now, it feels like there's something more. Something that's not just about the child, about what we've agreed on. It feels like, we're building something else. And I'm not sure what to do with that." Alexander looked at her, his gaze intense yet gentle, as if he were waiting for her to continue. He had always been the one to hide behind control, but tonight, it was different. Tonight, he was letting her in, and that made Amara feel exposed in a way she hadn't expected. "You're right," he said quietly. "This was supposed to be simple. We agreed to do this because we both wanted something, but I can't shake the feeling that it's becoming more. I care about you, Amara. I care about what we're building here. It's not just about the child. It's about us." Her breath caught in her chest at his words. She had known, deep down, that this was more than a simple arrangement. She had felt it in the way they spoke to each other, the way they spent time together, the way their conversations grew deeper with each passing day. But hearing him say it out loud made her feel vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, for what they were becoming. "I care about you, too," she replied, her voice trembling. "But I'm scared. I've spent so long building my life on my own, on being independent, that I don't know how to let someone else in. I don't know how to balance that part of me with what we're creating here." Alexander's expression softened, and he reached for her hand. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. We don't have to have all the answers. We're figuring this out together. But I want you to know that I'm not just asking you to be a part of my life for the sake of a child. I'm asking you because I see something in you, in us, that I can't ignore. I don't want to keep pretending that this is just about the baby. It's about building a life together, Amara." The sincerity in his voice struck her deeply. She hadn't expected him to say those words. They hadn't discussed their future in such direct terms before. But now, hearing him speak of a shared life, a partnership, made her question everything she had thought she knew about herself, about her future. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to try. I don't want to walk away from this before I see where it can go." Alexander squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I'm just asking you to be here. With me. We'll take this one step at a time. We don't have to rush." Amara looked at him, her heart beating faster as she felt something shift within her. There was no certainty, no promise of a perfect future, but there was something about him, something about the way he cared for her, something about their shared commitment, that made her believe it could work. Perhaps it wouldn't be easy. Perhaps it wouldn't look the way she had always imagined. But with Alexander, she felt that there was potential for something real, something lasting. For the first time in a long time, Amara allowed herself to believe that they could build a life together, not as a business arrangement, but as two people who had found something worth fighting for. "I'll be here," she said softly, looking into his eyes, letting her walls crumble just a little more. "I'll try." The weight of the unspoken words that had hung between them for so long seemed to dissipate in that moment. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step forward. And as they sat there, hands intertwined, Amara realized that this, whatever it was real. It wasn't just about business. It was about them, and whatever future they could build together. And for the first time in a long time, Amara felt the stirrings of hope for what lay ahead. The days after their conversation were filled with a quiet sense of anticipation, as though Amara and Alexander were standing at the precipice of something both exciting and terrifying. It wasn't the type of future either of them had ever envisioned for themselves, but it was one they were now building together, piece by piece. Amara's life, once filled with the hum of corporate deadlines and the constant shuffle of business deals, had taken a backseat to something she couldn't quite define. She had agreed to become a mother to Alexander's child, yes, but it was more than that. In the moments they spent together, whether they were discussing the practicalities of co-parenting or simply sharing a quiet evening, she felt herself slipping deeper into the life he was offering her, and it was becoming harder to tell where her world ended and his began. She had expected the process to feel clinical, like a business transaction wrapped up in emotions neither of them truly wanted to confront. But over time, that initial impression began to dissolve. It wasn't just about a child anymore, nor was it just about the legacy that Alexander had wanted to build for himself. It was about them. It was about learning to trust each other, to share what they had been unwilling to show anyone else. It was about a future they hadn't planned but were now willing to create together. Amara had always been fiercely independent, self-reliant, and in control of every aspect of her life. Letting someone in had never been easy. But with Alexander, something had changed. She had never imagined that an arrangement born from necessity would blossom into this, something raw, honest, and so completely unexpected. And though she still had her doubts, her fears, and her uncertainties, she realized now that she wasn't afraid of losing herself in the process. For the first time in a long time, she was allowing herself to be vulnerable, to open herself up to the possibility of love, of real, genuine connection. It was a Saturday morning when Alexander invited her to spend the day together. He had insisted on taking her to a quiet, little-known park on the outskirts of the city. They both knew their time together would be limited once the baby arrived, and Alexander seemed determined to make the most of every moment they had. He had also hinted that it would be an opportunity for them to talk, to put everything on the table and truly understand where they were in their relationship. Amara wasn't sure what to expect from the day, but as they walked through the lush greenery of the park, the tension she had felt earlier in the week seemed to lift. The tranquility of the space, the sound of birds chirping in the trees, the smell of fresh earth and flowers, gave them both a sense of calm that had been absent for so long. "I thought we could talk about what comes next," Alexander said, his voice soft, though there was an undertone of seriousness in it. Amara nodded, her hand brushing against his as they walked. She hadn't anticipated how much she enjoyed these quiet moments with him. They didn't need to discuss business or plans. They didn't have to focus on the future. For once, they could just be present with each other, sharing the space between them without expectations. But she knew that the conversation they were about to have would be a defining one. "I think it's time we address what we both want from this, not just for the baby, but for us," she replied. "We've been so focused on the child, and on the practical side of things, but I want to know what this means for us as a couple. I need to understand how we move forward, together." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes filled with both resolve and a certain vulnerability that took her by surprise. It was clear that this was a conversation he had been thinking about for a while, and he seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "Amara, I know this isn't conventional, and I know it's not the life either of us planned. But I can't deny what I'm feeling. I'm in this, not just because of the child, but because I want to share my life with you. I want to build something with you. I want us to figure out what we mean to each other beyond the circumstances that brought us together." Her heart began to race as he spoke. His words hit her in a way she hadn't expected. She had always thought of this arrangement in terms of practicality, a solution to a problem, a way to make sense of a desire to have a family. But now, standing in front of him, the depth of what he was offering her settled heavily in her chest. This was no longer just about a baby. This was about a future. A partnership. "I've been afraid, too," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Afraid of what this means, afraid of losing myself, afraid of what we could become. But I can't deny what I feel for you, Alexander. There's something between us that I can't ignore." Alexander reached for her hand, holding it gently, as if afraid to break the fragile moment they were sharing. "You don't have to lose yourself in this, Amara. I'm not asking you to change who you are, or to sacrifice your independence. I just want you to know that I'm here, I'm in this with you. Whatever it takes. Whatever we have to face together." For the first time, Amara allowed herself to truly believe in his words. She had spent so many years building walls around her heart, hiding her true desires, pushing away the thought of ever depending on someone else. But in that moment, with his hand in hers, she realized that she had been wrong. She didn't have to give up who she was. She didn't have to compromise her identity to be with him. She could have both, a family and a future with someone who saw her as an equal, someone who wanted to build something together. "I want to try," she said, her voice steadier now. "I want to see where this can go. I don't have all the answers, and I don't know what the future holds, but I want to take that step with you." Alexander smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing. He pulled her into an embrace, holding her gently but firmly, as though he, too, needed to believe that this was real, that this was the beginning of something meaningful. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, as the world around them continued its quiet rhythm. It was as if time had slowed, allowing them a moment to truly connect, to feel the weight of their decision and the promise of what was to come. The day continued in a haze of quiet conversation, walks through the park, and shared moments that felt more intimate than anything either of them had ever experienced before. It wasn't just about the baby anymore. It was about them, about the connection that had blossomed between them in unexpected ways. They talked about their hopes for the future, about the life they wanted to build not just for the child, but for themselves as individuals and as partners. Amara had always prided herself on her ability to control her destiny, but now, standing beside Alexander, she realized that some things were beyond control, and that was okay. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to embrace the uncertainty, to welcome the unknown. It wasn't about knowing exactly what the future would look like, but about being willing to face it together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the park, Alexander turned to her, his eyes searching hers as if he were waiting for something. She felt a flutter in her chest as their gazes met, the unspoken promise lingering between them. "We're doing this, Amara," he said quietly, his voice filled with both certainty and hope. "Together." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her that she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "Yes," she whispered, the word carrying more weight than she ever imagined. "Together." And in that moment, as the city around them continued to pulse with life, Amara realized that everything was about to change, but it was a change she was ready to embrace. With Alexander by her side, they would face whatever came next, building the future they both needed, one step at a time.